Thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel. Welcome back. Today in our ongoing series looking back at the Five Nights at Freddy's games, we're at Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the final chapter. First, I just want to start off by saying thank you for the amazing support on these videos. It is more than I ever could have imagined, so thank you. I also want to say that the next video is going to be about FNaF World, which presents a unique challenge, so it might take a little bit longer than normal to get FNaF World out. With that said, let's start this video about Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Like I said in my Five Nights at Freddy's 3 video, everyone thought the third game was going to be the end to a trilogy. That was the last game, but we know that didn't turn out to be true. Let's take a look at the Five Nights at Freddy's 4 teasers. 4.jpg, a terrifying, cartoonishly so, Freddy Fazbear. A bunch of what would later be known as Freddles crawling all over him. The final chapter, Halloween. Here we have the Was It Me teasers. These are probably my favorite pieces of official FNaF art ever. The lighting, the poses, Foxy's spiking tongue blade, glowing eyes, it's amazing. The Was It Me text was interpreted as a lot of different things, but mainly, who did the bite of 87? Which one? This was supposed to be a reveal of one of the biggest ongoing mysteries in the franchise, and people got really hyped. Also, it was the name reveal of these new animatronics, the Nightmare animatronics seen as very lightly visible on the teasers. Then the color purple again, this time not necessarily related to Purple Guy. Who exactly this new purple bow tie belonged to wasn't entirely agreed upon, which wasn't helped by the mystery of what the text at the bottom of the screen said when brightened. Property of... No, yeah, very helpful. However, it was generally believed to say Fredbear's Family Diner or be related to that, or maybe it belonged to Shadow Freddy. Also, there's a smaller light in the corner illuminating a reflection of some sort of jaws, and who these jaws belong to would be revealed in the next teaser. And here we go. Stomach mouth, purple bow tie, black and white body. The reveal of Fredbear. This was confirmed by a secret code in the inspect element of the website. A random set of letters that, when taken back one in the alphabet, spelled out Fredbear. Also brightened in the corner is the text, or was it me? Well, you already know, but we didn't back then. Other hidden text includes something that appears to say property of me. There was also the theory that there's a teeny tiny itty bitty crying child or puppet face, which, looking back on it, makes me realize just how much we were reaching back then. And terrible things come in small packages. A tiny Springtrap plush, now known as Plush Trap. And here's where things begin to get strange. This no longer looked like a pizzeria, it looked like a house. And of course, there were more theories out there about this. 8-Bit Gaming posited that the window in the back of Mangle's quest were these same windows. I love 8-Bit Gaming, but they must have pulled their backs out with some of these reaches. This would also inspire the worst piece of Five Nights at Freddy's fan art ever, not because of lack of talent, but just because the way that it is. If you know, you know. Also, another thing to note really quickly is that in the source code of Scott's websites and a lot of these points, the numbers 8 and 7 were hidden all over the place. Obviously, we know what that means now. Then there was the trailer. What is it that you think you see? Flashlight in an empty hallway. Clock chimes. What game do you think you're playing? Boom. Terrifying. This line right here, what have you brought home, was cause for a lot of speculation. Assuming it was a sequel instead of a prequel, people figured that maybe you bought it from the auction at the end of FNaF 3. But who would want these in their house? Maybe you were playing as the son of Purple Guy. Well... This also revealed that there would be more than just one screen, one office. Each door had a screen, you could run around the room, and there was even a view of a hallway with Plush Trap. People speculated that this would mean it was similar to the fan game Five Nights at Wario's, where each night you are in a different part of the house. But all of these questions would be answered when, as usual, Scott Cawthon released the game ahead of schedule, July 23rd, 2015. Now, I know I say this every single time, but Five Nights at Freddy's 4 really changed the game gameplay-wise. No longer did you have the power of industrial electronics to fend them off, only a weak flashlight and your creaky doors. Before we get into the gameplay loop, which does change at times, let's talk about the aspects of the gameplay. That's right, movement. The first game to really have any sort of movement. You have a few places you can move to in your room. First, the center of your room. Here is where you can choose what part of your room you want to move to. You can go in front of you, you can swipe down to look behind you, or click on your left or right. Your closet is in front of you where you can use the light and hold the door closed. On either side of you, you can run up to the doors and look down the hall. You can hold the doors closed here too and use the light. And then, looking behind you, you can see your bed. Your two lines of defense in this game are your flashlight and the doors. Unfortunately for you though, you can't just press a button to close these doors. You have to actively be there holding them closed yourself. Their default state is open. The light works much like FNaF 2, just using control to shine it. The doors keep the animatronics out, and the light scares them away. Now once again, these things change depending on the night, but mainly this is what you'll be dealing with. Now let's talk about the main characters. The main characters are Bonnie, Chica, Freddy, and Foxy. Bonnie and Chica come to either the left or right door respectively. If you can catch them in the hallway with your flashlight, you can hold them off for a moment. However, don't get too overzealous with your light. If they're too close and you shine it, they'll jump scare you. That's the main way you'll die in this game. So how do you tell if they're close to you? You listen for their breathing. I know, it's weird that the animatronics have breath, but that's the mechanic. So you open the door, listen for breathing. If you hear it, hold the door closed. If you don't, shine your light to scare them off. They don't just jump scare you from the doors though. If you let them come in, they can kill you too, either Bonnie attacking you in your room or Chica sending in the cupcake. I don't know. Freddy works in a very different way. Checking on your bed, these little evil Freddy plushes slowly begin to pile up over time. Shining your light on them scares them away. If too many pile up, Freddy will come out from under your bed and jump scare you. Honestly, I think there's a real missed opportunity here for you to actually see Freddy under your bed, but these Freddles are pretty scary anyway. And Foxy. He moves back and forth around the halls too. However, he doesn't jump scare you from the door, and when he gets in, he doesn't kill you either. Instead, he hides in the closet, which you will be notified of by this little animation. From here, he has a few different phases, first being a plush, and then becoming a monster, until he finally climbs out of your closet. You can check his phase by using the flashlight for a moment and hold the door closed to make him slowly move back in phases. So despite not having a camera or a maintenance panel to deal with, there's all these different complementary aspects of gameplay that mean you'll always be on the move. With that, let's look at the main gameplay loop. Now there are many different strategies people use to beat this game. Some of it relies on memorizing exactly what certain sound cues mean, some of it relies on mechanically going back and forth in an exact loop, but all of them use at least a few of the same aspects. Check the doors. Bonnie and Chica are always going to be the most imminent threat, and keeping Foxy at bay by shining the light before he gets in will only make your life easier. In between almost every other action you do, check the bed. While Freddy may be the person you die to the least, if you let him sneak up on you and forget, you're in for a rude surprise. And check Foxy regularly. Like Freddy, making sure to check on him every few actions is very important. There's a few things that we haven't talked about yet. First, fun with Plush Trap. In between nights, you get a chance to skip 2 hours in the next night by completing a minigame. You are sitting at one end of a hall with a plush version of Springtrap from the third game sitting on a chair. It will only move if you have the lights off. A timer ticks down and your goal is to stop Plush Trap on this X before the time runs out. Only problem is, if Plush Trap gets too close, you get jump scared and fail. If the time runs out, you fail. This would seem hard, but thanks to the dedicated community, you can beat it pretty easily by following specific times to use your flashlight that they trial and errored. The other time it gets different is on night 5. You run around from door to door, looking behind you, expecting to see some Freddles or hear some breathing, but there's nothing. Instead, after a moment, you hear this. And that's when you know some shit is going down. There is only one animatronic in the house, Fredbear, Golden Freddy. He can appear anywhere, either door behind you in the bed, in the closet. The only way to keep track of him is using the sounds of his footsteps moving quickly back and forth, or the sound of his laughter. If he laughs, he's in your room somewhere, on your bed or in your closet. If he's in the closet, shut the door. If he's on your bed, shine the light on him. You can check him at the door with the flashlight, but be careful. Looking too long or flashing the light too many times will activate his jump scare. This use of turning the gameplay upside down completely on the last night creates a sense of panic rarely seen in the other games. Hey! What the frick? I should also mention, much like FNaF 3, there's an extras menu that unlocks cheats, a gallery, and more, the more difficult nights you beat. Night 5, the Night 6, Nightmare mode, and the secret 2020 mode, which we'll talk about later. We also got some interesting behind the scenes stuff looking at how some of the models were created. Oh, and Night 6. It starts like a normal night, except really difficult, but at 4 AM it changes to a harder version of Night 5, except instead of Nightmare Fredbear, it's a new character simply known as Nightmare. Visually, this game changed the pace the most out of any game so far. Now, there was a lot of differences in the visuals, but there was always a through line in the previous 3 games, a security office. However, just from the menu alone, which is amazing by the way, you can tell we're in a completely different environment. The location of a house brought the game series into the realm of haunted house media like Poltergeist and The Conjuring. The visual of the menu also helps a lot with the world building. Even though we see a relatively small portion of the actual house inside, just by seeing the house here, we get a sense of the actual space the world exists in. The room in which the main game takes place is pretty good at creating a very certain atmosphere. Old wallpaper, plush carpet, toys lying on the ground, a lava lamp, photos, and stars plastered on the wall. It creates a real feeling of nostalgia, almost melancholy, which is emphasized by the music, but we'll get into that later. Another thing to note is all the little homages to certain staples of the game. A robot toy, a toy phone, a fan. From the hallways outside the door to the fun with plush trap room, the house feels big and empty. It gives you a feeling of being small, not just emphasizing the fact that you're a child, but that you really aren't in control. The animatronics loose in the house really have a sense of scale because of how open and empty the house feels. You get the feeling that there's nobody else in the house to help. No parents to run to, no one else the animatronics are after. It's just you. And here we are again. I'm gonna be 100% honest, the Nightmare animatronics are not scary at all. The teaser art made it look pretty cool, but especially in-game, there's absolutely no fear factor when it comes to actually seeing them. In fact, sometimes when I see them at the end of the hall, I just get relieved. As with the other games, the more that they go over the top and try and one-up the last game, they lose the feeling of the uncanny valley that made them scary in the first place. Now, there's something to be said about how they match with the canon and the lore of the game, but when it comes to just seeing them in-game, there really isn't any fear factor, and some parts, like the cupcake jump scare, make me lose all tension. On some more specific notes, I feel like Nightmare Freddy really got the short end of the stick here. His design is a little bland, especially when compared to Nightmare Fredbear or Nightmare Foxy. Also, a note on Nightmare Foxy. Foxy clearly had the design change of removing the big spiky tongue, which for a long time was speculated to be to deter the more undesirable fan art. But I think it was later stated by Scott to be just that it was harder to animate. Alright, even with all of my criticisms of the visuals, this is the only Five Nights at Freddy's game that still scares me. Even though the characters themselves don't look that scary, it's the fact that you see so little of them that really adds to it. The only time that you get to see them is after you're already dead. The mix of wide open spaces, panicked gameplay, and silence adds up to create something that still scares me even so many years after its release. Where the visuals may have lacked, the audio is amazing. It is the best in the series, and it really makes up and carries the entire game. From the creepy chorus-like menu music to the dark, drony ambience to the creepy footsteps and the barely audible breathing, it brings it all together and makes it legitimately terrifying. Just listen. It feels almost too real while elevating the level of dread and fear. But let's get into a little more detail. The ambience actually has a lot of different pieces. There's the drone in the background and the reverberating bells, but there are a lot of little touches that build the atmosphere and make it seem like there's actually a world outside of the house. The grandfather clock chiming, a dog barking outside, or the distant sound of wind chimes. It gives a lot of depth to the soundscape, and I think it's the scariest background ambience of any FNaF game. In contrast, the fun with plush trap ambience is a little more focused and overt with its churning, almost water-like background ambience. This really separates it from the main gameplay, but the two still feel very connected. There's a lot of different sounds that act as components to the gameplay, from the creak of the door to the jump scare to the frettles and the breathing. The jump scare, much like the animatronics, is a little over the top and monstrous. It definitely doesn't feel very robotic, but I suppose that fits with the plot. It also fits with the other non-robotic aspect, the breathing. Interestingly, the breathing you hear in this game is not exactly what it sounded like when the game first released. The audio was originally too quiet, so the volume was increased in a later update. Okay, I could talk about the audio forever here, but for the sake of time, I want to talk about one more aspect. Nightmare Fredbear's laugh. In Five Nights at Freddy's 1, Freddy's laugh sounded almost like crying, but in FNaF 4, Fredbear's laugh is evil and sinister. Not only is it lore relevant, there's an aspect to it that is really uniquely scary to me. When I was younger, I would have these recurring nightmares about these two siblings coming into my room and debating whether or not they were going to kill me, and the older brother sounded exactly like this. So there's that sort of unique aspect that makes it extra creepy to me. Unlike the other games, Phone Guy isn't here to explain the premise. He's not in the game at all, actually. Well, kinda. Instead, you just get a tutorial. Instead, the game opens with a countdown, 5 days until the party. And here we go. So, before the start of each night, you are thrown into a minigame, counting down the days until the party. In these minigames, you play as this crying child, tormented by his brother and guided by this creepy Fredbear plush. We learn that this kid is terrified of the animatronics and apparently witnessed something terrifying. You soon learn that this party is this kid's party. After you beat Night 5, it's the day of the party. The older brother and his bully friends further torment the crying child until...
Was that the bite of 87?
And so, at least for the time being, we figured out the bite of 87. Until the 1983 date came up, but whatever. After beating Night 6, the crying child is seen in a void, with a voice talking to him. Who exactly is speaking is up for debate. Then his plushes, including his Fredbear friend, disappear and a quiet sound of a flat line is heard. There are plenty of other little secrets in minigames and gameplay. Of course, there's the 1983 TV with the Fredbear and friends. Phone Guy is also technically in the game. A distorted and slowed version of his Night 1 FNaF 1 phone call can be heard sometimes in the ambience. Some people have pointed out that this is where the bite of 87 is first mentioned, further putting the focus of the game on this. In one area of the minigame, you can double back and see Purple Guy helping someone in a springlock suit. And another large part of the theory crafting section, your bed. Behind you are items on your bedside table that will change. Flowers, a bottle of pills, and an IV bag. If you're not looking in the heat of gameplay, you won't notice it, but the changes are definitely there. Less of a secret and more like a fun fact, the pictures on the wall are of Scott and his family. And then there's 2020 mode. By going into the extras menu and typing 2020 into your keyboard, you unlock an extra and hard night, although it doesn't reveal anything besides giving you an extra star. But I know what you're thinking. There's something else, something missing, and you're right. There is one last thing. After beating Nightmare mode, you get a screen of a box. The box. Clicking on the two locks moves them slightly, but there's no way to open it. There were countless attempts, even going into the source code to find out. After a while, the text appears on screen. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten, for now. And so it began. Alright, this is the motherlode of theories, so we'll get to that last. For now, it's pretty much the usual stuff. The fan songs, Break My Mind, slaps so hard. Fan games, there was a really cool Iron Horse Cinema, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 short film. If I remember correctly, this is when the hate train for Five Nights at Freddy's really picked up because of the infamous Five Nights at Freddy's PewDiePie video where he wasn't scared at all.
Okay, bud.
Of course, there was the Bite of 87 meme that came up more recently as like a meme resurgence. On a more personal note, this was the first game I ever actually finished. And Scott Cawthon also made a Halloween update. There was a lot of debate about what all of this update meant in the story, but Scott Cawthon clarified that it was largely non-canon, so it was more just for fun. Okay, theories. There are so many theories for this, it would be insane to try and cover them all, so I'll break it up into 4 points. The bite, the main story, the box, and of course, dream theory. The bite. Now, the most obvious explanation for this bite scene is that it's the bite of 87. But the entire thing was thrown into question with the 1983 Easter egg. There were two ways to interpret this. This was actually a separate bite called the bite of 83, or this was the bite of 87, and the 1983 date was the date of Fredbear's founding. In the current FNaF lore meta, I have no idea what the more accepted theory is, but there you go. To me, this being the bite of 87 makes the most sense because Scott was literally telling us it was in the source code earlier. Then again, it wouldn't be the first retcon in the series, so there's that. Okay, there's one more thing I want to bring up here. It's more of a tangent, so bear with me. I also remember MatPat making a video about the bite of 87 and how if we were the bite victim scientifically, it wouldn't work out. Now, obviously this was just a snarky, I know more than you video that, what can you expect? It's MatPat, and it didn't actually have to do with the story. But I remember 13, 14-year-old me posting a comment because I was genuinely surprised how many times he proved himself wrong with his own points. I don't want to make this too long, so let me just say what that comment was because I want to be the snarky YouTuber this time. MatPat's main points are these. Number 1, people with frontal lobe damage tend to lose their fear, their inhibitions. So why would the player be scared? Well, just because the player is scared doesn't mean that the character is. To be honest, if you think about how a kid would react with a monster in their room, they would be hiding under the covers or going to turn the light on, not running around potentially shining a flashlight in the monster's face for no reason. The second is that frontal lobe patients don't usually have nightmares in the first place. I think there's a decent case to be made here that these nightmares actually take place before the bite, but because of the medical supplies, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they do. In his own example, he gives the example of somebody who had a recurring nightmare about animals attacking him. Then after he had a frontal lobe lobotomy, he said he would have very similar dreams, but he described the animals as happy. But I think it's fair to say that the crying child was scared of the restaurant before the bite, as we see in the minigame, so it's very easy to see why he might have recurring nightmares before then. Then after the frontal lobe bite, that is when he became fearless. The nightmares before, he might have been hiding under the covers or trying to turn on the light or running. But now, he's fearless and he's just sort of playing this game with them where he's running back and forth, playing fun with plush trap or shining the light and trying to scare them away. The vicious animals are now friendly, but they're in the dream all the same, just as he points out. And finally, MatPat says that frontal lobe victims tend to not be able to focus on things for too long, and that the focus of the game would not really be plausible. Okay, well, what kind of focus are you talking about? The frettles on the bed, and oh no, now there's somebody in the hallway, and oh, Foxy's in the closet, oh, and now somebody else is in the hallway, and oh, the frettles are back. The gameplay is varied enough that it actually makes sense that you would always have your attention on something. As well, you wouldn't actually be focusing for hours. Just like game time is not necessarily congruent with real time, dream time and the waking world time is not necessarily always congruent, which is why you can have dreams that seem to last for days when you were actually only asleep for an hour. Sorry for the long-winded detour, I just needed to finally get that out there. Okay, so the main story. How exactly does this all fit in? Well, most people generally believe that this was the old location Phone Guy talked about before FNaF 2, and in between FNaF 2 location and the location seen in the Save Him minigame. But when exactly this took place was still up for debate. 1983 or 1987. There was also theories about who we were actually playing as. A very popular theory is that we weren't the crying child victim at all. We were his brother, seeing imagery of the hospital room of his brother whose death was his fault, haunted by the masks and the imagery of the restaurant and his friends who helped him make the worst mistake of his life. Finally, Fredbear confronts him in the final night, attacking him now. It's a decent theory. Alright, the box. What the fuck was inside? Theories range from Springtrap to the puppet to a meta-analysis of the community as a whole. Scott ended up addressing it in a community post saying that it's one of the only mysteries the community has yet to solve, and ending it by saying some things are best left forgotten forever. To be honest, as the game moved on, the box has sort of been forgotten, and I'm not really going to have a chance to talk about it except if I decide to make a series like this on the books. So I want to talk about this specific point right here. This was a sort of retrospective stream that Markiplier did with his friend Tyler, who didn't really know much about the games. There's plenty of theories and ideas thrown out, most of which weren't exactly groundbreaking or even correct, but there's one moment when they're talking about the box that I remember.
Well, my question would be, with 2 locks, it makes me think like 2 different people have to have keys to open the box.
I've never thought of that. Oh. See, this is why I bring him here. I've never thought of that.
Makers of the animatronics, like, are there 2 people that made them?
Are there? There are! Because Sister Location just established that. Because there are!
It's moments like that, these moments of sudden realization where pieces start coming together and you have this light bulb go off that I think perfectly captures why the theory community grew so big. It's these aha moments. Speaking of aha moments, the dream theory. During a stream by MatPat with some of the biggest theorists in the community at the time, Scott Cawthon began live updating his site to communicate with them. All of these questions and hints led to this little moment.
Here's a weird, this is weird. Okay, yeah. But it's one of the things that immediately jumps to my mind. Is it possible, again, this is completely off the wall, is it possible that FNaF 2 didn't actually happen?
And it was just, yeah, I know what you mean.
Similar to FNaF 4, which takes place inside the mind of a child, you know, is it possible that FNaF 2 also took place in the mind of a child? You know, maybe, again, this tortured boy. Also think about the element of putting on a mask. You know, you have a child maybe putting on a mask, or you have the brother who has shown himself to regularly put on a mask. You know, again, this is without having any time to...
And so began the dream theory. For a full explanation, watch MatPat's video. But I remember the feeling of what seemed like we had finally uncovered everything. Almost the whole story could be explained. Sure, it was a bit of a cop-out, but that's why Scott said he wondered if the community would accept it. Obviously, it turned out to be completely wrong, and it sounds kind of insane thinking about it now, but part of me really felt at the time like this was a good thing. We had finally solved everything, and most parts at the time seemed to fit. I just had the sense that the story had been solved. What a naive little shithead I was. Okay, so where does this game land? I'll probably get some shit for this, but I'm putting it in B tier. A lot of people think, that I've seen at least, that it's one of the worst games in the whole series, but like I said, it's one of the only ones that still scares me. And yes, the visuals aren't great, and yes, that is sort of when the story started going downhill, but in general, the audio is really great, it's still really scary, and even with all of the other stuff, I think it deserves to be at least on the same level as Five Nights at Freddy's 3. And so would begin the most different, the most insane. If you thought Five Nights at Freddy's 4 was different, you haven't seen anything yet. FNaF World. Okay, sorry this one took pretty long to make, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway. Obviously the world has been kind of crazy, so it's been kind of hard to focus. Either way, FNaF World is next, after some patron stuff. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments, and suggest what I should cover next on my Twitter. You can also follow me there, because that's where I'll be updating when I'm streaming at twitch.tv/SaganHawks. See you all next time.